Okay, so a bunch of you sent me this video. I don't know why. I don't know why it would be relevant to anything that I do. I've been hearing a lot about this channel, Unsolicited Advice. This will be my first exposure not only to him and his channel, but to his thoughts and ideas on a topic I hold near and dear to my heart. Why debates never solve anything.
I love a good debate, and I am not alone. A great many people really prize debate. Public debates are a big part of our political systems and our popular discourse. To debate well is seen as an indicator of your intelligence, your knowledge, and the strength of your claims. But how justified are we in placing this much confidence in public debates?
Okay, well, he clearly was not around for the great Debate Bro arc, where video essayists destroyed intellectually all debate bros and all of the debate bro culture, pointing out that people who win debates are not smart. They're just rhetorically effective, and that definitely would have nothing to do with being smart.
On reflection, I think we have reasons to be skeptical. As much as I enjoy a public debate, I think we place far too much confidence in their ability to settle issues and get to the truth of the matter. And here, I'm going to explain why. However, let's start by outlining the ideal debate so we can find out just how far we fall short of it. My name is Joe Foley, and this is Unsolicited Advice.
I essentially think that most of the debates that we see on social media are a bastardization of what debate is for, but I actually think that good debate, particularly Socratic debate, is, or as he's probably going to call Platonic debate Socratic debate, they'll probably be used kind of interchangeably for good reason, is two people in good faith wrestling with ideas, trying to find a resolution. Even, just to be clear, when two people are coming in good faith, that doesn't mean that they don't get frustrated, that they don't get heated or passionate. It means that they are honestly engaging with what the other person is saying. They're not coming with some pretense of entertaining one set of emotions while actually being under the influence of the other, which is the definition of bad faith, right? So something like self-deception is also something that can make you bad faith. And as I've said before on this channel, people are bad faith in debate all the time. I'm bad faith in debate often, right? We all fall short of like the golden merit of being good faith. But to me, to be good faith means you're saying that you're genuinely listening, and you are. You're listening to your counterparts and giving it the maximum benefit of the doubt. So if they say a line that sounds sussy or sounds like they might have a shitty worldview, you're assuming the best implications of what they're trying to say and requiring proof of the worst possible interpretations before you jump there. And also, if their argument maybe seems weak and a little bit fractured, you do your best to work with them to flesh it out, to ensure that you fully understand their idea before you tackle it and take it down, right? And so when two people are both being good faith, that means they're both trying to mutually understand one another. They're giving each other maximum benefit of the doubt. They're not assuming maliciousness when there isn't. And they're both fully trying to understand the best version of one another's viewpoint, so that these two viewpoints can come together to create a better, broader viewpoint. That's like the golden standard of debate. And to be clear, we very, very rarely see that. Most debate that we see now is what like I would almost call like, it feels almost like WWE fighting, except it's less scripted, obviously. Piers Morgan is a good example. This is from 3 days ago.
If the person is brown, they need to be rounded up and put into quote unquote alligator Alcatraz, a concentration camp in Florida. If the person is white, we let them start a business and become Elon Musk.
Do you know how many people Barack Obama deported in 8 years?
I don't know and don't care.
Well, hang on. You don't know and you don't care. The majority were brown.
Absolutely disingenuous argument, Piers, because this is your shtick.
It was your shtick.
It is your shtick, and everyone knows that it is.
It was your shtick. People got bored with it. Have you watched Brokeback Mountain?
No.
Are you posting on your blog that you wouldn't watch Brokeback Mountain because you don't want to see two male characters having sex? Your words, not mine, Joy.
And your point is?
I've actually got Michael Knowles waiting in the wings.
Great.
Is there anything you'd like to say to him?
that intro was a great example of what I want to talk about. Most modern debates, particularly being championed by peers, but it's been done by a lot of others for a long time. In fact, there are many debates that I get rejected from being on because most large moderated panels like Piers Morgan or modern day debates, they're looking for two clear opposing sides and they want them as oppositional as possible. And what this does in part when the moderator is looking for the most opposition, they're canceling out anyone who might be more moderate, is that they're essentially looking for the highest team player stakes. That way, when viewers watch, there's two sides and they have to pick which side is their team, whether they agree with this side, side A or side B. And then after that, it's about watching team sports and hoping your team wins. Now, the issue when people watch debates is a couplefold. Number one, a lot of people genuinely seem to believe that the first person to get angry has lost the debate. This is obviously not good debate. This is not how we analyze ideas. It shows that that person might have worse emotional regulation. It also might show that they're getting ganged up on more and are getting frustrated more, very understandably. It doesn't really show anything, but this is something you'll actually see like some EO bros do. And actually recently on the left side, allegedly Ian and that Danny guy who debated Jordan Peterson, this is often a tactic that they're trying to use, is that they'll use frustrating syllogisms and then slight mischaracterizations of your argument to get you frustrated because they know that if they react, that will get them clips for their side. Their side will be like, oh yeah, sick. Got that other guy on the other team so angry. Okay. So most debates have turned into team sports, which is not what debates are for at all. They're not for team sports. So we've already, especially at the mass level, 4.04 million on Piers Morgan, we have people signing in to watch team sports. Rather than football, it's two intellectuals wrestling it out, and the muddier they get, the better. Another really big issue with debates is a lot of people, when they watch debates, they evaluate who the winner is in this debate on essentially who says the thing that I, the viewer, agree with the most. This is really common when I'll see people who I debate that are very strongly oppositional to, that I know that overall probably my argument was stronger and sounder, just based on like basic premises of logic, and they'll come and they'll insist that their other person won. In fact, the people who do this the most are usually the ones most often insisting that they win everything. Usually that viewer, when you get down to like why I lost and the other person won, the fundamental of it is the person I was opposing, that this viewer thinks won, said the things that the viewer agreed with. Somebody saying something you agree with doesn't make them right or wrong. It just makes you view them more favorably. But that's not actually how any of this type of intellectual debate should occur. So my view of debate, particularly in how polarized and partisan things are, is that almost everyone is bastardizing it all the time. And at this point, it's purely for performance. I am not always perfect. I am trying my best to not do that. I try my best to have good faith debates. In fact, I think I often get into trouble because I am too good faith and I don't like using more bad faith tactics, right? Trying to ask questions in such a way to just piss off your opponent makes it seem as though you're just asking them questions to suss out their ideas. But what you're actually doing is trying to get them to react so that you can get the win. That's definitionally bad faith. You are acting as though you were being driven by one set of emotions and feelings while actually being under the drive and intentions of something else. That being, I'm just asking questions, when in reality is going, how far can I push you until you get pissed off, right? I would say 9 out of 10 debates on the internet are bad faith from both sides most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. I think one thing that really set Destiny apart, particularly in his Red Pill arc, is that he was exceptionally good faith and still dominated his opposition, whether his opposition was good faith or bad faith. And one thing I actually appreciate in the Red Pill space is a lot of the debaters in the Red Pill space are actually good faith in that they actually listen to what you're saying, they disagree, but they engage with what you're saying genuinely. They don't try to misconstrue it. They don't try to like just use a tactic to get a weird dunk on you, which again, people who come pre-prepped to debates with like a list of questions that they hope will trap you, those people, again, are being bad faith, like definitionally. They're not trying to find truth. They're not trying to find an answer. They're trying to get an optical win. And I hate it. So most modern political, like public debate, I think is basically useless, other than if you can stand out and win optically, you'll get views and hopefully pull them to you so that when you're not debating, you can like share your ideas to that person and maybe convince them in a more neutral space. But the true heart of debate to me, Platonic or Socratic debate, whatever you want to call it, is that good faith to good faith, wrestling impassioned. It's what Nick and I do all the time. I think it is the most important way to ground out your philosophy and what you think. I think it's vastly underrated. I think it should be in most schools. I think people should be taught to debate and how to deal with that type of contention very early on. And I think it's essential to actually having a rounded out philosophy that you operate from. And I hate to see how social media has ruined it, while simultaneously I'm participating in the thing that's ruining it, right? Which creates this dissonance for me that, to be frank, I don't have the resolution for. I don't know the perfect answer. I do my best to try to be as good faith as much as possible. That feels like my resolution. It harms me a lot. I've been told no from Jubilee multiple times because I'm not extreme enough. There's a lot of moderators that contact me wanting me for events, and I'm like, well, this isn't like quite my position. It's more like here, like it's more nuanced, that just like want to do away with it, or like just they would just want to find a topic where we're opposite on. Which the real lesson is just tell the moderators I'm on one side and then show up and then be nuanced when I get there. But yeah, the dissonance is real even for me, because I understand that to some degree, even when I'm just trying to be good faith as much as possible, I fail that because I'm human. I also am going to be dealing with opponents where good faith is not possible, because there's strong debaters that are also being bad faith, which can be very, very difficult. And therefore, I necessarily have to subject myself to my side winning or your side winning, which I really don't like. But it's hard to get any growth in the space if you don't get exposure. So that's one of the dissonant things that I think happen in this space. Anyways, that is my long-winded view of debate. I think it's beautiful in its form. I think it's the most important thing. And if you can do it with friends, you should do it as much as possible, because I think it'll make you think really well. Public debate, haven't been a big fan of most of it. Sometimes it's really good though. You get two good faith debaters in a public discourse that are impassioned, and those are the greatest debates ever. Most of my debates with Byron are like some of my favorite debates because he's always good faith. Always, always, always. I really, really respect Byron for that. One of my absolute favorite debates was on Whatever, where Andrew Wilson and I talked beforehand and agreed to like some rules of engagement of how we would debate, which was essentially, I think both of us agreeing like, we're not going to go for stupid dunks and gotchas. We're going to actually engage with what one another's saying. Fantastic debate. Because Andrew Wilson's very smart, very strong debater. And he was really good faith in that debate. I think I was decently good faith as well. Absolutely one of my favorite debates on the Whatever podcast. So they do happen. They do happen. And when they happen, the craziest part is when they do happen, when it's two impassioned people with opposing positions that are both good faith and genuinely engage with one another, the audience loves those debates the most. Always. They always do boogaloo numbers.
The tradition of public or semi-public debate in philosophy stretches at least as far back as Socrates, and probably long before then. At this point, they are little more than dinner table chats, and I think that, in a lot of ways, these Socratic dialogues are emblematic of what people think public debate could be at their best. In a Socratic dialogue, each participant follows a pretty odd code of etiquette that's probably much more reflective of how these conversations were written down or just made up wholesale than how they actually took place. Nonetheless, we get an almost perfect picture of how debate might proceed in a semi-idealized world. Most of these dialogues were either written down or recorded by Plato, and one of their main features is that no one is that concerned to concede that they were wrong, and almost everyone falls over themselves to get an accurate understanding of what the other speakers mean. Even characters that are painted as belligerent or even rude rarely hinder this process of the conversation. And again, this may be an artifact of the fact that Plato is writing these dialogues down as a philosophical, educational exercise, rather than necessarily recording them exactly as they were written. Though, of course, we will never know.
But reasonable to presume, because a lot of the tradition of writing in that Greek era would be to take true history and slightly mythologize it, so that what they care about is that the text communicates the actual principles of the lesson of history, not that the history is perfectly reflected. That was very classic in this era.
Additionally, the dialogues are not absolutely perfect. Everyone has a tendency to marvel at whatever Socrates says, as if even his arse could dispense nothing but God's eternal law. But nonetheless, each participant seems pretty much committed to finding the truth, regardless of whether or not that was what they initially thought. This is, to put it mildly, an optimistic picture of how debate normally occurs. However, I do think there is a real value in this idealized conception of debate. And in more modern times, people have attempted to codify the constraints on what might consider a very good exchange of ideas. Not only can this help us to have better conversations by attempting to imitate this model, but it can also help us realize just how far we drift from it in practice. Much of this research is done in the field of informal logic, where an awful lot of attention is paid to theoretical rules of discourse. Now, different thinkers formalize these rules in very different ways, but they each try to hit upon what we would intuitively think of as an honest, informed, and good faith debate. My favorite approach is formulated by Douglas Walton in his book, Informal Logic, A Pragmatic Approach, which I've referenced on this channel before. The broad conception of the debate here is cooperative, but without totally losing the naturally combative nature of a genuine substantive disagreement. Both parties are actively trying to persuade one another of their point of view, but at the same time, they also remain open to the possibility that they themselves might have got things wrong. All of the other rules are geared towards facilitating this. The two debaters here are thought of as having two different belief sets, and somewhere in the combination of those belief sets would be a contradiction, and probably more than one. This is what amounts to their disagreement.
I'm going to just give a big shout out to someone right now. I did a recent debate. It's been a while. But this person, I hate the way that he gets treated in our social space. And he just rolls with it because he is tough. Hold on. It's not that far back. It's me and Connor. Man, I've been putting out videos a lot. Good job, Sulak. Where is it? This conversation was exceptionally good faith. And I did not expect this one to do well, but this one got 19,000 views. Now, I just want to talk about this guy here. For those of you who are unawares and watching this now, his name is online. Well, his name is Connor. Online, he goes by Counterpoints Poll. Yeah, Counterpoints Poll. He's got a Warhammer channel that's bigger, but this is his political only channel. Counterpoints is probably one of the most intellectually humble and honest people in the political space. And it doesn't matter how much people weaponize that to humiliate him. He maintains his intellectual humility and honesty always. And that's why I think that video did so well, is because I think a lot of you who watch my content are obviously probably interested in good faith debates, which I aim to try to do, which, to be clear, I fail you guys on that all the time, and I'm sorry for that. But Connor is masterful at everything that Unsolicited Advice just said here. And Unsolicited Advice is just correct. He's just correct about the ideal debate, what Socratic debates are for, what actual ideal good faith debates are for, what they should look like, the principles of them, essentially. Counterpoints isn't just good at trying to understand the other person while representing his own ideas. He's also good at being performative and a little bit spicy. He'll call you names. He'll get big and dramatic, right? Because a lot of people who are exceptionally good faith, I can think of other friends, I don't know if they'd want to be listed just because I don't know how much of a public presence they are. They're exceptionally good faith. But the debates are never interesting to listen to for most YouTube viewers because there isn't any spice. And let's be honest, a little bit of yelling is fun. Okay, we all like a little bit of yelling. And also, there's this idea, I think, for a lot of people that when they hear like a good faith debate, they think like everyone's genteel and, you know, we're sipping from our cups with our pinky up and, well, being polite little boys and girls. But that's not actually the case. You should be incredibly impassionate. In fact, Aristotle talks a lot about the idea of how, you know, the friend of virtue that you are debating with, the friend of virtue to Aristotle was essentially a good debate partner, more or less. He talks specifically about the passions that should be within it, right? He wants you guys to get angry. One of my favorite things about Connor is that every time we debate, we'll call each other mean names. I'll text him afterwards and be like, hey, sorry if I went too far. And he's like, all's fine in the war, in like war and fighting or whatever. He always rolls with it. It's never personal. He never makes it personal. And you can tell because the way that he'll treat you immediately afterwards is clearly never personally offended. Or even in this space, and I'm not perfect either, a lot of people, after you debate them and you're mean and spicy, things are weird. Things are tense. That makes debate really hard. I actually think that this is an area where I think women will often struggle in. I think a lot of times in like girl code, if we end up like yelling at each other or being really aggressive, I think a lot of times it necessarily does damage the relationship, because when you're like, especially what I'm calling like femme coded in like your speech, in the way that typically in femme spaces we communicate with one another, we don't really yell at each other. And if we do, like, it's always bad. It's always not good. And this is in part because we've been socialized that female anger is bad and we shouldn't have it. And we've also been socialized to think that if a woman raises her voice at all, that she has an annoying voice and is nagging or being a bitch, right? There's lots of reasons why women are like this, but I think that's part of why in the debate space they can really struggle, because a lot of times passions will fly, and it's really hard to separate that and not take it personally between the interpersonal relationship. And so I think women will struggle in two ways, in that they won't want to get super aggressive and mean, because that's viewed as kind of a no-no in femme-coded spaces. But also if somebody gets aggressive and mean at them, they'll read that as an interpersonal problem when it's not in a professional-ish debate space. I'm professional because I'm trying to separate interpersonal versus on like a WIC panel. I'm not saying that like we're professionals. So big shout out to Counterpoints. Recently he debated Pisco, and he admitted at the end not only that Pisco was correct, that he had convinced him that Pisco was correct, he also outlined the steps that Pisco took to convince him. And despite that, most liberal spaces treat Connor like barely better than a heel, just to be clear. Nobody appreciates him. At best, they'll say, you're not really a conservative. And it's like, yes, he is. You just think conservatives are evil people. He is conservative. He's just not a bad person, because it turns out your politics aren't that tied to your actual principles and character. Shocker.
Some rules of discourse might be as follows. Speakers must persuade one another based on what the other already believes, and must not misrepresent one another to the best of their abilities. Both speakers must answer questions honestly and not try to hide their beliefs. Both speakers must accept the consequences of their beliefs if they are shown to have those consequences via a valid deductive chain. A speaker must not dismiss an opponent's arguments without reason. A speaker must acknowledge and respond to all reasonable points their opponent makes. A speaker must not assign to their opponent a belief that their opponent has not accepted. A speaker must not change their belief set without stating so explicitly. And they must concede points explicitly if a fault in their position has been demonstrated. Theoretically, there could be a lot more, and I suppose you could continue outlining increasingly specific rules if you so wished, but they tend to go roughly along these sorts of lines. The idea is, if they were followed, then the debate would genuinely be an incredibly useful means to get at truth and to evaluate each speaker's position. This is pretty closely connected with making sure that no one makes a fallacious argument, and you could check out my video on logical fallacies for more on that. The idealized debate is one where both speakers are seeking to persuade one another, but only in as much as they are both seeking truth and just happen to have come to different conclusions. In this ideal world, they would each have access to the best and most up-to-date arguments supporting their respective viewpoints. They would not misrepresent one another, and there would be no interfering incentives that swayed the speakers away from this ideal goal of seeking truth. Additionally, in a public setting, the audience would be roughly the same. They would approach the exercise in total good faith. They would not be persuaded by anything other than sound, rigorous argumentation, and emotionally charged rhetoric would simply bounce off them. In other words, everyone involved, including the audience, would be relatively informed, acting in pretty good faith, and would form opinions about the debate simply on the quality of the arguments given, rather than pay attention.
So I agree with him that this is the ideal standard for debate, which is what Platonic talks about. And I suspect where he's going in this video is that that never happens. What I would actually argue is that a realistic Platonic Socratic debate isn't the expectation on the audience. I don't actually expect the audience to have like that much knowledge on the debate. I think there's like a precursor that like any good moderator should educate their audience on from the beginning, which is like, just remember, just because somebody yells, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. We're looking for the substance of the argument, not how things appear. It'd be nice to give the rule, just because somebody says something that you agree with, it doesn't mean that they're winning or losing or that they're right. It just means that you happen to agree with them. Those might be like good audience rules, pretty general, but that's actually my that's like my highest expectation for the audience. Anything above that is just like, you've got golden colors. So a lot of you guys who watch me are very sophisticated debate watchers. A lot of you will be very honest with me when you think that I've lost a debate. And you're wrong every single time. I'm just kidding. Every time though, you're wrong. Just kidding. But I actually think that we can have a Socratic debates that have slightly less than the things he listed. I think that there's some things we could like let go, because we don't need every debate to be maximally good faith. We just need every debate not to be bad faith. And I think debates would be pretty effective, right? And so I'm not sure where he's going with this argument, but I would essentially argue he's set up the ideal, maximal good faith, ideal situation for debates, and said that is when debates are really useful to getting to truth. I would actually argue you can get to truth even with neutral faith. It's only when you get into the bad faith territory where truth is no longer being sought. And I would agree that, again, 9 out of 10 debates online that these days are bad faith, more or less, on average. However, that doesn't mean that we should stop debating. It means that we should continue to push others to have good debaters. And more importantly, here's a really unappreciated thing in the space. Moderators need to up their game. Moderators of panels, first of all, you guys have the easiest shit ever. Not totally. The behind the scenes logistics of getting debaters together is actually a nightmare. And there's a reason I don't host panels. It's because it's annoying to herd cats all the time. So that part I'll just grant is fucking sucks. So they do all their work pre-build up. And then after that, a lot of moderators, not all, but a lot of moderators put people on the panel and then they sit back. So Raging Tomato, Sarah, whatever her name is, I think is a good example of a moderator who does a fair bit of work behind the scenes to put it all together, which is awesome. And then she puts on the debate and kind of sits back. And she's, I would say, explicitly biased towards her side as a moderator. So I'd say like Sarah is probably one of the worst moderators in the space. And there's all kinds of variation. Piers, I think, is also quite low on that regard, because he jumps in to kind of argue for just his side all the time. Moderators are really underappreciated. I think one of the main things that would actually improve the debate space is by getting moderators that insist on at least not bad faith. I think if you had a moderator who would curb it quickly, who would catch it immediately, and be like, you're just being bad faith, and could like explicitly tell them why very quickly. And like, I think that shit would actually pop off well. I think a lot of viewers who are getting fatigued of just like the yelling and the team sports at each other would find it really refreshing. I think that it could be like the next kind of new wave of popular debate forms, because moderators are really underappreciated. And I think a lot of moderators underestimate their role. They think that like doing the logistics and just making sure that everyone's like not interrupting too much and like being mostly fair is like what a moderator does. I would argue a moderator has a pretty heavy hand in the debate, but they don't have a side. They are heavy-handed on meta litigation though, right? They will very quickly be like, if somebody says, you're strawmanning me, and the other person goes, no, I'm not, you would pause quickly and go, okay, person A who said you're strawmanning me, re-outline your position. Have them quickly say it and be like, say it in a minute. Person B, summarize what you just heard. And if they again strawman, correct them and go, there's no way that you thought that they said that. You are strawmanning them. Stop it. What did they actually say? And if they won't answer, you tell them what they said and they say, engage with that. And be like pretty brutal to debaters. And the problem for this moderator host is you're going to have a really hard time at first, I think, building up panelists that will come on, because panelists aren't going to enjoy it if the moderator's yelling at them all the time. But because we're so bad faith, that's like such the standard. God, watching Gen Z TikTok, they actually on the left think that bad faith debating is like sicko mode debating. Like I'll have so many people on the left being like, have you seen this guy? He's an epic debater. And I'll like watch it and I'm like, he's just bad faith like the whole time. Like this is not good. That type of like moderator who's pretty heavy handed would have a lot of work to build it up. So it'd probably need to be somebody who's like already pre-established as a channel. So they have clout to kind of keep people coming on. But man, that would be, you guys want a content idea? Anyone who wants to make that, who's got a decently established channel, I would say probably a minimum of 100K on YouTube to do that, to have enough pull. You would just get really good shows. You just would.
To prior biases or anything else. Now, if public debates tended to be like this, I would be almost totally on board with them in almost every situation. And I do think it's worth noting that sometimes they get tantalizingly close. I can think of the debate between Bertrand Russell and Frederick Copleston about the existence of God. Here are two thinkers on entirely different sides of a debate who nonetheless easily find where they disagree without either shying away from conflict and thus turning this into not much of a debate at all, or things devolving into a bad faith shouting match. They are also going out of their way to make sure that the debate is incredibly helpful for the audience. Each of them is a highly trained academic, and they would be able to converse entirely in technical terms if they liked. But they put things in plain and simple English so the rest of us lowly mortals can understand and follow along. They don't make an awful lot of headway with one another, but then again, it would be pretty surprising if they did, considering that both of them had been studying the topic for over 40 years at this point, if I remember correctly, and they had no doubt encountered one another's objections in some way, shape, or form many times before. I'll come back to this point about not making much headway later, as I think even the best public debates can easily suffer from this issue. My point is, I'm not a total pessimist, and as I'll come back to at the end of the video, I do actually think that public debates could have a very valuable place in our general discourse. I just think we need to go into them with our eyes firmly open. The reason I wanted to talk about these idealized debates and this premier example of a debate is that we can start to ask whether most of our public debates are likely to measure up to their example and their criteria. To simplify things down enormously, we could ask the following three questions of any debate. 1, does the debate actually get closer to the truth? 2, are participants able to conduct the debate in total good faith, aiming only for truth, including the ability to concede points?
See, again, this is too high. Like one of my biggest frustrations with like more philosophy-oriented people is that I feel like that the neutral ground is lost. Are they able to conduct the debate in total good faith, aiming only for truth, including the ability to concede points? I don't even care if they're in total good faith. I don't even care if they concede points necessarily. All I care about is that they are not bad faith as much as possible, that if they are bad faith, it's rare and corrected, and they both aim towards some level of neutral to good faith with one another, genuinely engaging with one another's ideas. I think those debates in and of themselves are effective. I just do. So I think that this bar is too high, essentially, for like what is useful public debate.
And 3, are the audience likely to be persuaded by sound argumentation, and to what extent are they likely to be persuaded by other unsound factors?
I don't think the audience comes at all, essentially at all. I think in general, when you put the burden of something like content performing well on the audience itself, I think you've lost the plot. I think like the point of being a performer, the point of person making public discourse or anything is that you're aware that the audience is like at your behest, at your sway, right? And so yes, right, if I debate Sneeko, his audience is way less likely to be persuaded. But that doesn't mean that the debate isn't effective, right? It's slightly less effective because he's just probably got people that are way less interested in like intellectual thinking and more interested in just like masturbating how mad they are at women. Or I guess now it's like Muslim. So I don't know what the current grift is for Sneeko. Whatever his current grift is, his audience probably doesn't want to move that much off of. However, we also have to be reminded that the chatting audience and the listening audience are not the same people, right? I might even move my own audience more towards certain positions that they might have been skeptical of before. I also, while I might not move any of his chatting audience, because I tend to be kind of the most extreme in support of whatever content creator they're chatting for, I will likely move a large number of his listeners as long as the argument is sound, I engage in good faith, and he doesn't bad faith optically wreck me, which is another thing to kind of get into.
Now, I can't actually go out and experience every public debate out there, so my argument is largely going to be based on incentives, empirical psychology, and a certain amount of intuitive anecdote where those two sources run out. That is, firstly, I'm going to look at what debaters are incentivized to do in a debate, and secondly, I'm going to ask if, from what we know about human minds, are we likely to be persuaded by sound public argumentation, or are other factors going to be more important in this debate setting? Debating game. For the sake of this section, I'm going to treat debaters as if they are, roughly speaking, self-interested. That is, that they're going to conduct themselves in a debate in a way that will generally work out best for them as a person in the long term. Of course, in actual fact, people are swayed by many different concerns and often do follow a set of higher values, sometimes against their own self-interest. But we can still get a lot of insight by thinking about what a debater is generally incentivized to do in the setting of a debate. Now, I'm going to assume that the debater genuinely does think that their point of view is correct. Despite the endless cries about grifters, I have enough optimism in humanity to think that most public debaters probably do believe the positions they put forward, though maybe I'm being unrealistically naive.
You're not. Like everyone calls everyone grifters. The grifter is the most unironically overused word ever in this space. People change their mind all the time, even if they don't change their mind for good reason. A lot of people who are public faces, they change their mind based on public discourse. And so if the current meta of the public discourse is, the Coldplay thing, everyone seems to think it's awesome and funny and hilarious to like dunk on the Coldplay couple that were found out or whatever. Very few people are going, look, what they did was wrong. They're cheaters. But probably like blowing it up to this extent and continuing to make jokes at their expense is only doing harm to them, disproportionate harm to them than they deserve, but also to their children, to their spouses, to their businesses, like things that like cheaters deserve to lose their relationship and damage and fracture all of their close interpersonal relationships by the major breach of trust and presumably for their friends, the breach of assumed character. I don't know if you deserve to be on The Simpsons and the chronic meme and potentially lose your job. I just don't think that that's related to being a cheater, right? But the current meta opposes me on that, right? Probably a lot of you in the chat will be like, I totally disagree with you about the cheater. I think it's funny and hilarious, and I think they totally deserve it. They got caught, losers, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And I would basically say, on social media, the stupid prizes that you win are way disproportionate. However, a lot of content creators will have the position that making fun of the Coldplay people is fine, and just like leaning into the joke is fine because they're cheaters. So we don't need to worry about it anymore. And they're not going to think about any of those other things, and they would disagree with me. That's not because they're grifters, even though it's a popular opinion. It's because most people's positions move with the popular opinion. That's why it's popular in large part. And so content creators are not grifters if they move towards popular opinion as well. It just means that they're probably not very good thinkers, right? That's why like people say like Asmongold's a grifter. It's like, well, he's probably just following popular opinion, right? I don't know if he's necessarily a super good thinker. Like he's not a philosopher king. That doesn't mean he's a grifter. And why would we assume this?
Extent, there will be a baseline motivation for them to put together a good case for their point of view. This is a pretty good thing, and potentially one of the real strengths of public debate, even as it currently exists. Since there is a general social censure for appearing to not know what you're talking about in a debate setting, debaters are incentivized to at least prepare for the debate in some way, shape, or form. However, there are also incentives in public debate that can work against good faith debating. A really good example of this is the case of admitting that you were wrong. Oftentimes, conceding points in a debate can make a debater look weak, and thus they are punished for the very kind of good faith behavior that we actually want to encourage. This will obviously be different in different settings, but especially in political debates, it is often pretty disastrous to admit at any point that your opponent might be right about.
Having a moderator that just speaks to this can dispel a lot of these issues. If at the very beginning they say being wrong is praised here, we do not punish people for being the white girl move. We do not punish people for being wrong. It's good. That is what we call exceptional faith. And if somebody steps back and says that they were incorrect, we on this channel, we celebrate them. What you'll see is the audience will follow toe for that, because the audience is there because they like the moderator and whatnot. It won't change like Twitter, people who hate you, like trying to dunk on you necessarily, but it'll lessen it a lot, because all of that audience who watch the debate will be in support of, no, actually being wrong is, admitting you're wrong is the most good thing that we can do.
As much as it would be nice to be able to freely admit when your opponent might have a point, to the speaker's pre-existing audience, this can look like consorting with the enemy, especially if they're debating a topic where emotions run hot, which are the very things that we want to encourage good faith debate about. In fact, one of the reasons that I really value you guys is that I'm pretty sure that I could admit to having been wrong about something or otherwise change my mind without facing a major backlash. All of this means that a debater's
because you could develop it. And the issue is nobody puts pressure on people to develop it. But we just can, especially if it becomes like the cool socio-cultural thing. Then not doing that behavior makes you look kind of slimy. It will take a while, but these things can just move. Public perception of this can move.
Any big issue that's been debated for any length of time is likely to be incredibly complicated, and the arguments involved incredibly sophisticated. Even debates that we might already be familiar with are often much more complex when you get to the cutting edge of the research. Take the free will debate. Many of us will be familiar of the debates between free will and determinism.
I think I just wholly disagree with him. Just because something has been raging for a long time and it won't be solved. In fact, it might not be. Essentially, when he's talking about like advancing towards the truth, he's talking about like if truth is like a goal that sits here. Every time we have major philosophical breakthroughs in free will versus determinism or nature versus nurture, we take like another little step towards truth. And every singular debate that maybe is on this topic has the possibility to take us another step closer. But the reality is that most debates aren't gonna develop on top of an extremely long-windedly argued for centuries debate. But what I would argue is that the pursuit of truth does not have to mean that in the global scale you're taking another step for humanity towards truth, because oftentimes people do not read the greats in the histories. So while yes, for somebody who probably reads a lot of philosophy, like unsolicited advice, a lot of the arguments that he's going to see in like a free will versus determinism debate isn't going to be new. I actually think these type of meta-ethical debates are kind of useless because they're fundamentally, they always fail Agrippa's trilemma on all sides. So I don't care. I don't care about any of these types of debates. But even if you do, just because you're familiar with that all doesn't mean that most of the audiences watching it are, or that they fully have understood. In fact, oftentimes it takes listening to the same type of debate over and over and over again before you really start to iron out where you fall in it, where all the nuances are, and why these nuances matter, right? I've probably debated abortion probably 40 to 50 times. And I'm still ironing out arguments that I think are stronger. I'm still updating things. I'm still thinking more. I'm flexing back and forth on weeks a little bit. I'm still tweaking it, right? So even though it's been done and done and done and done again, and there isn't really anything novel that I can add until like more research comes out, essentially, it doesn't make it less valuable, because truth is both a global thing of truth, but also an individual's experience towards truth. And so even if globally we're like here, say if this is the true answer to whether free will, compatibilism, or determinism is the right answer, okay, this is the true answer that we don't know yet. And we're slowly, with our philosophy, we've been inching closer. Most people are here. They don't know anything. And so a lot of debates will get them, you know, a really good debate will get them like a number of steps forward. And then another debate that's maybe not as good will get them half a step. And then they'll debate it and they'll get another half step, right? So it could be moving towards truth for the individual subjective without kind of globally moving us all as like a philosophical front towards truth.
In the debating square of Athens, people were not usually persuaded just by sound argumentation. In fact, he often saw perfectly good points thrown aside for utterly baffling reasons. People would dislike the speaker and immediately infer that they were wrong. People would agree with whoever stirred their emotions in the right way rather than those who had the facts on their side. Time and time again, Aristotle saw that argument was overruled by rhetoric.
And this is why Aristotle is the beginning and end of philosophy, okay? He's all you need to know.
And so he came to the following conclusion. In a debate, being right is often insufficient and sometimes troublingly unnecessary to win over an audience. In other words, we humans are persuaded as much by our irrational or irrational parts as by our rational ones.
Oh, this is why, okay? I just had a brain blast. This is why we've been so wrong about debates for so long. And I think something that Aristotle often missed, although I think he acknowledges it, which is that but Aristotle puts a huge emphasis on rationality as kind of being like one of the highest goods. Whereas I would say like true rationality takes into account and considers as he would say, the political art, right? The art of how humans organize. And part of how humans organize is fundamentally emotions, which we could say is irrational. And emotions sometimes are irrational, but sometimes they're not, right? Oftentimes when you're making a decision about how you should communicate to your girlfriend that you feel less attracted to her because she's put on like 25 pounds, or vice versa, figuring out how to talk to your boyfriend because since you've been dating, he's put on 20 pounds and you're less attracted to him, you could think about all the rational arguments that you could make. Look, it's not as good for your health. You're objectively less attractive, and you want to be as attractive to your partner as possible so that I want to have sex with you. Good luck with that conversation, right? The wise mind goes, how's this going to feel? Okay, for my boyfriend, he's going to be pretty embarrassed and shamed. For my girlfriend, there's the added element of really intense body shame and image pressures that society puts uniquely on women that men don't struggle with as much. Not that men don't have body shame or anything, but women seem to be suffering by it uniquely and more greatly because beauty is so much more pressured for women, right? The wise mind goes, these are the arguments as to like why, but I need to think about how she's and he is going to feel about the conversation and tailor the communication in that way. So you're going to look at that list of good arguments and you go, well, my partner actually probably would find this argument salient. So you're going to like pluck that one. And then you might say things that are less rational that my partner might care about is something like, I would just appreciate it. It would mean a lot to me if you did this, right? Maybe those two would be enough to convince your partner for a very, very difficult conversation, just to be clear. And before anyone freaks out in my chat, you can or cannot have this conversation. If you disagree and you think any body weight is fine and you would never ask your partner to lose weight, that's cool. I'm an asshole and I will definitely ask my partners to lose weight if they're gaining too much weight, and vice versa. Obviously, if I feel that I can do that, I would expect the same. And Nick and I have had that conversation before when I put on like 20 pounds and wasn't working out, like years and years ago. A wise mind takes rationality and emotionality into account and understands how the confluence of these two things together make for the most effective communication. Emotions of the crowd aren't bad. They're just unwieldy. And you need to be a really good debater is aware of both of these things.
And can often be fooled by a good show as much as convinced by a decent argument. In some ways, many of us will see this as obvious, but we don't often recognize its implications. It means that almost everyone, ourselves very much included, are likely to be swayed by totally illogical factors when we watch a public debate. We are not immune to the seduction of rhetoric. I've spoken before about the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and they outline a whole host of ways that we are persuaded by things that are not in any way sound argumentation. I'll just give a few examples. 1. We tend to rate a statement as more likely to be true if we've heard it before. This is known as the mere exposure effect.
True.
2. We seek out information that confirms our pre-existing.
This is why it's really good to restate your position over and over again, and especially like have a couple of core theses like written out so you can restate it over and over again.
Opinions. This is known as confirmation bias. This also means that we're much more likely to believe information that coheres with our prior beliefs than that which contradicts them. Hence, we enter debates already primed to believe whoever we already agreed with. 3. When we're confronted with complex questions, we tend to replace them with simpler ones. We might hear, what is the best way to manage an economy, and replace that with the question, under which government was I, personally, doing best? 4. We are often more persuaded by narrative than by argument. This is one reason why you see adverts and political ads tell us emotive stories rather than just cite statistics.
Sort of true. depending on your audience, right? A lot, for example, you know what narrative... What's interesting is that narratives sell really well until the narrative's been done too much. And then people hate the narrative, right? Anybody who is pro-choice has heard the narrative of, see this, it's a baby. You want to kill this baby? This isn't life. You know, some sob story. And so many people in the debate space are going to roll their eyes at this. Every time people come up to me like some like narrative sob story about why I should agree with them, I just roll my eyes. I do not care, right? So part of this is... This is true that narratives are very selling, but they always have to be like novel and authentic. Otherwise, I think that they fall very flat. And I think they actually damage the argumentation. I was debating with leftists last night. One leftist came up and was like, oh, when you use the word retard, it harms people. And this guy with cerebral palsy came up and he said it really hurt his feelings when you said retard. So like, shouldn't you think about that? And I was just like, no, like this doesn't change my argumentation for using this word. Like I do not believe that this word matters enough for you to tell me to limit my free speech. No, sorry, don't care. Unfortunately. And they're like, but you should care about the harm. And I'm just like, this is not an argument. This is not an argument to me. This one guy didn't like my words. Cool. There's probably a billion people who won't like certain words that I use. That's fine. That is not how we determine free speech. In fact, free speech is pretty fucking important. Not going to move on it very much.
There are also the myriad ways in which different emotions can prime us for being persuaded in different directions. There are famous individual examples of this, like disgust, fear, or anger affecting political views. But my point is much broader. I simply want to establish that people are quite likely to be swayed by emotional appeal and strong rhetoric as they are quality argumentation. Firstly,
this is why a good debater uses both and knows which to use. If I actually wanted to appeal to leftists, which I did once, I will get in their language and their world. I will use more narrative and harm-based arguments and use highly PC language to talk to them if I was like if I want to actually pull leftists. When I talk to moderates, for example, I'm going to use words like retard. I'm going to be a little bit like blunter and drier because they tend to like it. And I'm going to use a lot more of like science with some level of narrativizing because I think that tends to work best for the moderates that I like to target. It's just about like knowing your audience to know to like code switch. But again, this to me isn't like makes debates less valuable because there's like a human irrational element to me. I guess like maybe because of my like psych therapy background, like the irrationality, which I hate even how we call it this, the emotionality, because emotions can be irrational, but sometimes emotions are incredibly rational and we can't quite describe it, right? I can't quite describe to you why you should obviously say things more nicely to your girlfriend if you have to, or boyfriend when you have to confront them on an issue. But all of you have been in a relationship enough to understand why it's more effective. Why is it more effective? People like it when you say things nicely. That's why. You're like, but that isn't rational. Get fucked. That's how humans work. I just think a good debater bakes into their premises the assumption that they are talking to humans and understands what that looks like. And a good debater goes, who are the humans that I will be talking to and how do I pull them? Like part of what I think I really failed them to pull is I didn't research him or his audience at all. Again, I had like almost no time to do any research, but it doesn't change the fact that that was part of my failure on Tim Pool, why I gave myself like a B instead of a like A.
It's worth noting that just being in a heightened emotional state can make it easier or harder to persuade you of something. Reliance on emotion when reasoning has been found to make people more susceptible to misinformation, while so-called hot cognition...
This has not been replicated very well, by the way. That high emotions make you less rational. It's not actually super good evidence for that. That people who are going to be rational and use like their brain more will do so even when like heightened in emotion. And people who are not going to be inclined to use their brain don't, regardless of their emotional level. Your predilection to use thinking first is like habitually trained into you and personality based, not really emotionally susceptible.
Where our thoughts on a topic are motivated by our affective state. All of this suggests that we are not just persuaded by a sound directly from Kahneman. Different ways of presenting the same information often evoke different emotions. The statement that the odds of survival 1 month after surgery are 90% is more reassuring than the equivalent statement that mortality within 1 month of surgery is 10%. They then go on to say that this will affect people's actual decisions when they reflect upon the information. True. It's also worth noting that when Kahneman and Tversky talk about us replacing more complex questions with simpler ones, they often argue that we replace a cognitively taxing question with an emotional one. To use one of their examples, when we are asked, how should financial advisors who prey on the elderly be punished? Kahneman's suggested replacement that we use is, how angry do I feel about financial financial advisors who prey on the elderly, which is a very different question and, importantly, an emotional one. Reflecting on emotions as a whole, he says the following: "Your emotional attitude to such things as irradiated food, red meat, nuclear power, tattoos, or motorcycles drives your beliefs about their benefits and their risks."
Oh, I hate the type of thinkers that just like hate emotionality. They drive me crazy.
One of my first introductions to the philosophy of religion was watching these atheist-theist debates and then going away and reading more about them. I don't know if I'd be nearly as interested in theology or philosophy of religion now were it not for the fact that these debates were fun to watch, despite me not knowing all that much about the topic or having any prior interest. Of course, the flip side of this is that many people would have probably watched a couple of these debates and concluded that the issues discussed there were totally settled and so not looked into it any further. However, I largely think this is not a problem with debate itself, especially if that debate is conducted in good faith, but rather our attitudes towards debate. A primary reason...
I don't even know if this is our attitude towards debate. I think this is just our attitude towards media consumption, right? If somebody doesn't watch a debate, instead they just like watch a video about the philosophy of religion or some video that it gets thrown into there that will like, keep their interest. Some people will be interested enough that they'll go and research it. Others will go away and not. I don't know if this is unique to debate. The only thing that would be unique is that debate probably somewhat pre-selects for people that are somewhat more intellectually interested in wrestling with ideas. That's the only thing, is that debate pre-selects for an audience that would probably be more inclined to go and research, to go and fact check the debaters that piss them off.
If we view the debates not as establishing the truth, but instead something more educational, like exposing us to a swath of new ideas in an entertaining setting, then I just don't think we would have this issue. Debates would not be seen as the battleground on which truth is established, but just a quite fun intellectual exercise that, as a bonus, can maybe teach the audience, or indeed the speakers, something new. This is especially true when it comes...
Well, it can just be pluralistic, right? Like most debates are just going to be educational and persuasive and fun. Some of them will be more persuasive than they are fun. A lot of them will be very persuasive and very fun, right? And some of them will also eke us a little bit more towards truth. Even if it's not a global human truth, it definitely is moving the audience more towards truth, ideally, especially if they're going away and researching afterwards. And also, like, sometimes debates just open up new arguments that do like inch us a little bit more towards truth, right? Very recently, I've heard a lot of people using my implantation argument for abortion. I hadn't really heard that argument much before, but it's a really strong argument. It's the argument that moved me as a Christian away from thinking that life begins at conception, because implantation fails so often that essentially God is dooming more than 50% of the population to death for like no reason than just implantation. And I was like, that's probably not when like a human life that we value begins. Probably not. Maybe they're all in heaven, but like, if God doesn't give that much of a fuck about these people, like maybe I shouldn't either. Anyways, overall takes. First time watching Unsolicited Advice. I liked it. It was good. He's a good thinker. He seems a little bit more biased towards like the more kind of like staunch, typical white atheist perspective. And when I say like white atheist, I do mean white. Like I mean culturally white atheist, or they're very high on the science skeptic side, a little bit more dismissive of things like emotionality. But overall, yeah, that was a fantastic video. I agreed with, I would say 95% of what he said. He seems like somebody as well where he probably would appreciate the part where I would be like, I disagree here and here. And he speaks in such a way. I love talking to and listening to really good thinkers, because really good thinkers make it really easy to disentangle specifically the parts where you disagree and kind of highlight these things, which I feel like watching this video, I felt like I was very easily able to go, well, this is actually where I disagree and this is how. And it helps the audience build on it. And again, this is why good faith and good communication make for the best debates. I don't know if this guy's good at debating. I've never seen him. Does he debate? I have no idea. But great video. And if you got this far in the video, thank you. Check out my Patreon and type memory steal in the comments below so that I know that you watched this far. Big hugs, big kisses, think well, and I hope you have a day as wonderful as you are. Erudite out.